Hi, yeah, good afternoon to everyone. Hi, everyone. Yeah, Hirsch Sai here. Today is Tuesday, the 27th of February, 2024, and reporting from, unfortunately, still Auckland, New Zealand. And yes, today's topic, or the topic for today's talk video, is a very, very interesting one. I know I probably say that every time, or probably too much already, but really, I do find this one particularly interesting, and definitely one that I would say virtually all of us can relate to, if not all of us. And that is simply a saying that I came up with back when I was in university in the early 2000s. This would actually be over 20 years ago now. And it's simply that the saying, in the game of life, those who win are those who cheat. A very unfortunate reality, I think. And of course, not absolutely every single time people win or do well, it's because of cheating. Of course, there are those, even if they seem quite few, even if they are very few in number, there are those who, of course, work hard for it. But many a time before, I'd say probably over half the time, maybe even more than that, those who win are those who cheat. And I've made up other similar sayings, um, such as, there are those who do the work, and then there are those who get paid for it, you know. And I've also heard one saying which I really love, which I admit was not made up by me, but I think it's just brilliant. And it goes that the rain keeps falling on the just fella because it's the unjust who has the just umbrella. you know, so true. Really makes you think. But yeah. So why do I believe this? Why do I think that in the game of life, those who win are those who cheat? Well, there's just so many examples. Left, right, center, everywhere, big and small. No matter which country you're talking about, no matter which industry you're talking about, whether it's a big firm or a small firm or an individual, there's just examples absolutely everywhere. I think many of us can see that with corporates or businesses, just things they do to lure people into their shops or on their websites to keep them there, to get them to buy as much as possible, and to and just to keep increasing their costs whenever they can, especially if it's in a way that's quite hidden or misleading, even if it's legal. And then of course they nowadays they feed on social media and online advertising to hugely enhance that. And a lot of the practices they do are very, very questionable, even if they are legal. But I think that's fairly obvious, what we see in corporations. But there are other things, like many other things. Like you look at, for example, the developing and the developed world. And yes, the developing world is behind, and some people think it's their fault. And I'm sure they have their own weaknesses, just like every country on earth does, like every person on earth does. We look at developing nations in the continents of basically Asia, Africa, Latin America, sometimes also Eastern Europe, and of course Southeast Asia as well. Don't forget to include that part. But yes, they will have some of their own problems. But if you really look at the history of it, from the colonialism and slavery, it is really the West that exploited the East in many ways, to get ahead, to have a huge head start, to get ahead. And you might say, oh, that's history a long time ago, hundreds of years ago. But, the implications of that are still here today. The result of that is still present today. Even with the UK, Jesus, using slavery to colonize the US and to make it the richest country in the world, at the beginning of the 20th century, and even US, North America, you look at, how they stole the land from the indigenous American Indians or Native Indians, many of whom they also killed. That was the US, and Canada as well, the slavery there, what they did to Australia, again, taking the land off the indigenous Aborigines and using slavery to colonize that country. Or I'm actually not sure if it was slavery in Australia, but they did use their own prisoners in the 1700s. Australia was a British prison state, and then of course New Zealand, taking the land off the indigenous Maori people, the country and that New Zealand's the country I live in. And what they've done there as well, and there are still treaty claims or claims on the land based on the original founding treaty, the Treaty of Waitangi, signed on the 6th of February 1840. There are still land claims on that treaty that go to this very day. And then of course even India, the British took that away from the Indians. Thank God to Gandhi, we got it back. But still, they left a lot of trouble. Dividing the Hindus with the Muslims unfairly, basically Hindus who were in India and putting them in India, and then the Muslims who went to Pakistan and then turning them against each other, and that hatred, that conflict still goes today. You still have the disputed territory of Kashmir in northern India. I'm sure you get the picture. The list goes on. Even India slavery was used for India. People from India were used for slavery to develop Fiji, and that's of course why there are so many Indians there today. So, in so many ways, those who win are those who cheat, whether you look at it historically on a big scale, like the colonialism, the slavery, whether you look at it on the smaller scale, like your typical commercial website, which is just being operated from someone, perhaps just one person sitting at home. But I'm not saying that's a bad thing to operate a website sitting from home. I guess I'm doing that right now. But obviously, I'm saying, if that person engages in practices which may be legal, but of course, which are not very moral or fair, so it exists virtually everywhere. I look at, unfortunately, my mother and myself were, basically defrauded by some goddamn idiot who was just so angry because his cat and dog died and then his wife got cancer. Of course, I sympathize with that. I really do. I'm not saying that those things don't matter, and cats and dogs, they become members of the family. So losing a cat and dog can be just like losing a member of the family, who's human, So I do sympathize with that. And of course, your wife, your partner in life getting cancer is, of course, nothing, nothing small in any way, shape, or form. I do sympathize with that. I've lost all four grandparents of mine, and I lost them fairly early in life too. And some of them I didn't really get to even know that well, unfortunately, because they were overseas in India. But there's of course no reason to defraud someone, and that's what happened to my mother and I. We got defrauded and lost a six-figure sum. This was last decade, almost 10 years ago, but it of course affected us and it set us backwards. And that guy is still with the business today and still running it horribly. And many of the people who are his customers, clients, they are absolutely losing out because of it. And he's still receiving the high income that the business produces, so much that my mother and I had worked for. But again, that's what happens. We, of course, did think of taking legal action, doing something, but really we couldn't because the evidence just wasn't there, in writing, and it wasn't hard evidence that we could use in a court of law or in anything legal. Um, and on that note, how often do people get scammed or defrauded or unfairly treated? And of course, that option is always there to take legal action, but sometimes it's just very difficult. One, sometimes you can't afford it, and you think the money you put into the legal action, is it worth what you'll get out, even if you get all damages paid to you? And of course, just the time, the energy, on top of the legal costs. And it can be a very stressful process, and you still don't know if you will win, even if you do have evidence, for your case, and you're pretty sure that, you can argue that you can win it. Even then, you're not sure if you can win it because, again, it just depends on how individual lawyers, argue this or that. And that even goes back to one of my other talk videos, is law an ugly profession? And that's an interesting video just on that topic. And of course, usually it's those who can pay more can afford better lawyers, so there's that. So it's really interesting in so many cases, maybe not every single case. Those who win in the game of life are those who cheat, and I just see it again and again and again. And I see it in so many different businesses, even things like the university that I went to for 5 years. I won't name which university it was or where it was, what I studied, but what I saw there was absolutely shocking. You'll think that especially with the high fees that you pay to university. And I'm a domestic student in New Zealand. I'm a New Zealand citizen, born and raised here, so I didn't have to even pay the full amount of the fees. In New Zealand, the government, if you're a citizen or permanent resident, the government pays 75% of your fees. If you're an international student from overseas, from other countries, you have to pay the full 100%. So I think of even them, leaving their families, leaving their homes, their countries, leaving everything to come to New Zealand, and the sort of education they get here in university, or at the very least in the university I went to. But I would presume it exists in many universities because that's also what I've heard when talking to friends, and also what I've heard when talking to friends from overseas too. So not just universities in New Zealand. But coming back to what I saw, oh my God, it's just beyond frustrating. And even though I was in university 20 years ago, as mentioned before, just some of these things I still remember today. Why do they keep putting out new versions of textbooks? Sometimes people think it's because they updated the version for recent events, or they corrected mistakes that they found in the first version. in the second. That's not always true. Maybe they claim that, but they just want to, believe it or not, they just want to, a lot of the time, deter secondhand book market students who have already done the course, and then they want to sell their textbook because, they paid a lot for it in the first place, so they want to sell it to someone else who can reuse it, or, he can use it, and it's also good for, reusing, good for the environment. I think nothing wrong with any of that. But the textbook, or the people who publish the textbook, suddenly put out a new version saying, no, 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 you have to have the updated version because the old version is out of date. And one thing you'll just never believe, I actually remember a lecturer from university telling us, is that say you're deciding whether to buy the new version of a textbook for the full price, or a second-hand version from last year for a discounted price. What will you do if you want to see the difference in the two textbooks? You'll probably turn to a random page, right, and see if they're the same. And that's a very good way to do it. But you know what they do? I admit it's very clever, but still horrible. They will put in just like one more article or diagram or whatever, just some piece of content. They'll put in that towards the beginning of the textbook in the new version. So what does that do? It pushes all the pages back. So if you try to compare the same page on both textbooks, the current or the new version to the old version, they will seem different. And on top of that, they will do a new cover to really make it look different. So that's just that. And again, so many ways. Elon Musk, currently the richest man in the world, an absolute billionaire. What I read online is that he stole a lot of money from his own father. And on top of that, he spoke very badly about his father. He hates his father. He stole a lot of money from his own father and used that to start his businesses, like, SpaceX and Tesla. And even within his businesses, he unfairly treated people, overworking them, underpaying them. I think I heard even work conditions weren't the best in some of the factories. This is what I heard. So, you can kind of see where he's got ahead, or at least in part. Then there was Jeff Bezos, who's also the billionaire who did Amazon. And I think if I remember correctly from reading, he just inherited a lot of money, which of course helps. Who else? Bill Gates, who used to be the richest man in the world, I think, who was for a good, the better part of about 2 decades, who did Microsoft, or he ripped off, Apple, Steve Jobs, he ripped off Apple, copied their idea, just made a few tweaks here and there, and then sold it as his own, and that really hurt Steve Jobs and Apple, but eventually they came back and now they're doing even better than Microsoft. So again, just some examples. It's really amazing, and I just see it again and again and again. I remember once working in a charity organization, or sorry, an environmental organization, and I saw, if you like, corruption there. It's just absolutely everywhere, and it's sad, and it's probably in most places. But no, I've really come to that conclusion. And even if I came up with a saying a long time ago, I've really come to the conclusion more than ever today. In the game of life, those who win are those who cheat, and of course, it's not very encouraging. But if you can, and I know, much easier said than done, but if you can, and I try to do this myself, try to be the better person, do something for others, or donate, or give, contribute in some way you can. Try to be the better person, even if you lose out. Just, I know it's very, very hard, and I admit I'm not always the best at it either, but always try to be the better person, make the world a better place, contribute in any way you can, even if it's small, and just try to set an example for others. And who knows, maybe one day things may change, probably not, but a very little bit of change is still better than no change at all. So I think I'll leave you with that. Thank you.